Hello everyone, it's time for the Passover. I'm going to have to split this up, so this is part 1. We're in Luke chapter 22. Now the feast of unleavened bread, called the Passover, was approaching, and the chief priests and the teachers of the law were looking for some way to get rid of Jesus, for they were afraid of the people. Then Satan entered Judas, called Iscariot, one of the 12, and Judas went to the chief priests and the officers of the temple guard and discussed with them how he might betray Jesus. They were delighted and agreed to give him money. He consented and watched for an opportunity to hand Jesus over to them when no crowd was present. There has been debate for a long time as to why Judas would do this. I feel that his situation is no different than what we face every day. Satan can enter us if we let him in. It sounds mystical, but it's really just a matter of decision. So whatever Judas was facing, he had a choice, and he chose poorly. And may I remind you, betrayal is only possible if there is a bond in the first place. Judas was a legitimate friend of Jesus. It's difficult because we don't know what happened to that relationship, but Judas made the wrong choice, and it was the perfect opportunity for the chief priests. Then came the day of unleavened bread on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. Jesus sent Peter and John saying, "Go and make preparations for us to eat the Passover." "Where do you want us to prepare for it?" they asked. He replied, "As you enter the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him to the house that he enters, and say to the owner of the house, 'The teacher asks, where is the guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large upper room all furnished. Make preparations there." They left and found things just as Jesus had told them, so they prepared the Passover. I find it funny that a man carrying a jar of water was a strange sight in those days, but there had to be some obvious sign. Anyways, Jesus needed one last space of secrecy before it was his time. He needed to give his disciples the final talk. He knew that it wasn't necessarily the final time he'll see them, and we know that too. And to be fair, the disciples should have known at that time as well. But I would imagine that the coming couple of days would be a panic-induced blur, which is why they forgot that Jesus would be resurrected. When the hour came, Jesus and his apostles reclined at the table, and he said to them, "I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer, for I tell you I will not eat it again until it finds fulfillment in the kingdom of God." After taking the cup, he gave thanks and said, "Take this and divide it among you, for I tell you I will not drink again of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes." In a sense, Jesus' life was over. Not his life as in his soul, and not even the end of him as a human, but his life as we know it was coming to an end. And he references the real celebration when everything is fulfilled. "And he took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to them, saying, 'This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me.' In the same way, after the supper, he took the cup, saying, 'This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you.'" The disciples must have been real shocked that Jesus was going off script. But what was probably the most surprising was that he was giving a new covenant. There's quite a bit to understand about this, but I think the simplest way to put it is that the new covenant is a means of salvation. The old covenant and new covenant are actually somewhat the same, but the new covenant adds salvation to it. And it's not necessarily a rewrite either. The Old Testament is essentially the Old Covenant, and the New Testament is essentially the New Covenant, and yet there are many prophecies of the New Covenant in the Old Testament. The prophets talk about the salvation brought through someone, and Jesus is the fulfillment. Jesus' death is the salvation, so the importance of the Last Supper and of communion is to recognize that Jesus' death fulfilled the New Covenant, and we have salvation through him. We continue next episode. Thanks for listening.